Good morning. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. Please note any webinar, website, or email that I mentioned will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business licensing assistance, you can visit the Small Business Center at City Hall or call 312-74-GO-BIZ. Also, business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicago.gov/business licensing. The BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program now has a new portal, and getting your certificate is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Number 1, register for the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program. Number 2, attend 6 free BACP webinars from listed categories and receive credit after each. Number 3, graduate from the program and receive your certificate. Graduating from the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program makes you eligible to apply for CIBC Bank USA's Entrepreneurial Loan Program. For full program details, visit chicago.gov/BACP certificate. For webinar calendar, please visit chicago.gov/BACP webinars. If you are already a part of the program, your account will automatically reflect the credit for joining this webinar within 24 hours. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. I will post the mentioned information in the chat box. We encourage attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that the views, information, and opinions expressed during this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection or the City of Chicago. Today's webinar will be Community Wealth Building Workshop, What's a Worker Co-op? Expanding Democracy in the Workplace, presented by Center for Changing Lives. Turning the webinar over to Julian.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Julian Arroyo, and I'm the bilingual worker cooperative small business coach at Center for Changing Lives. And we're a financial opportunity center and a neighborhood business development center. So a little bit about us. We are a nonprofit organization, and we help aspiring entrepreneurs and established business owners with their business plan, help with marketing and digital skills development. We also work with the BACP and other city and state government and connect them to the right resources. And we can help connect you to financial and government resources as well, and hosting educational business workshops just like these. And with the focus of this workshop, we'll be talking about worker co-ops, a business model that's growing here in the city of Chicago and also throughout the country. But before we get into that, I would appreciate if the audience can complete our participant survey. We have it in the chat. So just to know if these workshops bring knowledge in regards to worker co-ops. So you might have heard of worker cooperatives, but before, it's important to know what a cooperative is. So cooperatives, it's a business model that benefits all its members. It's different from a conventional business. And it's important to know that there's 3 distinct cooperative models. So for the first one, it's producer cooperatives. They're pretty common in the agricultural sector. And pretty much it's a cooperative that's owned and controlled by producers, typically farmers that produce similar goods. They get together and produce similar goods and increase their market value. They're pretty common in a lot of rural communities throughout the country. And you might have heard of brands such as Organic Valley or Ocean Spray. Those are good examples of producer cooperatives. Another type of cooperative is consumer cooperatives. They're very common in the financial sector, and one entity are credit unions. They're pretty common. So credit unions, they're owned by the customer. So customers invest their money in the credit union and they get the benefits. They get a share of the profits as well. And also you have retail cooperatives. I'm sure you've heard of REI. A lot of grocery stores form themselves as cooperatives. And producer and consumer cooperatives, they work together very well. They're pretty common throughout the country. And the purpose of this workshop, it's a focus on worker cooperatives, which is a new business model. It has been in existence for a long time in other parts of the world, but here in the city of Chicago, there's been a growing number of them. So worker cooperatives, compared to other types of cooperative models, they're internally democratic. So they're owned and controlled by worker members. And they're not limited to just one industry. They can operate in any industry, whether it be retail, agriculture, construction, any industry. But the point of worker co-ops is that they're self-directed enterprises, worker-owned and self-directed enterprises, where all the workers get together and make important decisions in regards to the business. And it's not to say that worker co-ops are a better model compared to consumer producer. In fact, it's important that we have these three type of cooperatives work together. And we'll talk more about it as we move with the presentation. So all cooperatives, consumer, producer, and worker co-ops, they adhere to cooperative principles. Unlike conventional businesses, cooperative principles are, they provide community-driven enterprises. So these are the 7 cooperative principles. And the first one, it's open membership. So as voluntary open enterprises, it gives opportunity to anybody, regardless of gender, race, religion, immigration status. Cooperatives are open to everybody in the community. Another important aspect of cooperatives is democratic member control. So every member that is part of the cooperative has a voice, has an important say in what goes on in the decision-making of the business. Autonomy and independence is another value. So cooperatives operate independently. They are not influenced by external factors. They're not influenced by shareholders. It's an autonomous enterprise. Economic participation is another value where, again, the members that contribute to the cooperative also get the benefits. They can implement participatory budgeting. They can decide what to invest in and also share the profits. Another value is education, training, and information. So, for example, worker cooperatives, they make the effort of training all members to make sure everyone's well equipped, well informed, making sure that everyone's on the same page. And then cooperation among cooperatives. Just as I mentioned with the 3 types of models, they can work together to serve different needs. Of course, with producer cooperatives, they serve the needs of the people that produce, the farmers. With consumer cooperatives, they're a good vehicle for community investment. And with worker cooperatives, they help workers decide the important parts of the business, grow as entrepreneurs, and giving opportunities as well. And at the end, it's concern for community. They're community-driven enterprises. They prioritize democracy, sustainability, and also making sure that the community has their needs met. So yes, these are the 7 cooperative principles that all cooperatives abide by. So doing research with cooperatives, they're common in other parts of the world. In Europe, it's very common in Spain. So Spain has a large worker cooperative sector. And one of the most distinct corporations is the Mondragon Corporation, which is one of the largest worker cooperative networks in the world. And in Italy, in rural parts of Italy, particularly the area of the Emilia-Romagna, cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives are very common. However, in Latin America, there's also a growing number of cooperatives. And a lot of them, they use cooperatives as a way to combat the negative effects of international trade deals where corporations come in and neglect the needs of the community. So there's different countries in Latin America that have experimented with worker cooperative models. For example, in rural Mexico, in Chiapas in particular, there's rural communities, indigenous communities called the Zapatistas. They organize their economy through cooperatives. So in regards to agriculture, healthcare, education, it's all organized as cooperatives, different types of cooperatives, producer, consumer, and worker cooperatives. In Argentina, it's also implemented in their economy. So the workers get together and organize to buy out businesses that have been bankrupt. And there are about 20,000 cooperatives in Argentina, and they're pretty strong. And other countries that have experimented with alternative economic models, such as Cuba, who has more of a centralized planned economy. And most recently, they've opened up their markets to the communities where they've experimented with worker co-ops. Uh, in Cuba, agricultural cooperatives are pretty common. However, they're owned by the state. But as a form of self-criticism, Cuba has been able to provide opportunities to the community to organize worker cooperatives. And in Brazil, just how there's a network of cooperatives, Brazil helps workers get development, get resources and technical assistance to organize cooperatives as well. So there's a lot of examples throughout Latin America and Europe and other parts of the world that have experimented with cooperative models. So as we talk about the alternative models, right? There's not really the case in the way that we see our economic, in the way that we do business. So with the conventional business model, there's a separation of ownership, control, and power. And, as the way we see it, it's pretty hierarchical. With a conventional business, it's prioritizing the profits and value of shares. The majority or the major decisions are made by typically board of directors or majority owners. Policies are organized by stockholders or also the board of directors. And then when it comes to working conditions, wages, or just the general day-to-day, they're determined by the owners or the managers. So there's a disconnect from the top down. And this is where we talk about worker cooperatives and what they prioritize, how they operate. So as worker co-ops, they're internally a democratic enterprise. And adhering to cooperative principles, yes, democracy is very important. So it's applying the principle of one member, one share, one vote. So that can mean a lot of things. There's not one way of organizing a cooperative, but the most important thing is that to get all the workers together. So a worker cooperative enterprise can operate with direct democracy. So pretty much everyone's the board of directors. They all have a say in what goes on in the decision making. You can also have representative democracy where you can have elected managers or a board of directors. And that's the point of having democracy in business, where you don't see democracy as a formality. So how in elections, we can vote for our governors, we can vote for our representatives or congressperson. It's moving away from that formality, and also with worker co-ops, it's putting it in the business as a business model. So with worker co-ops, making sure that everyone's on the same page, making sure that everyone adheres to the cooperative principles of one member, one share, one vote, collective decision making. It's important to have bylaws, just how a regular business can have an operating agreement. Bylaws also with nonprofits has bylaws, but with worker co-ops, bylaws are essentially the cooperative's constitution, and that can address every area of the business. It can address how members are admitted. It can address just day-to-day member meetings, voting processes, defining roles and responsibilities, term limits, and most importantly, distribution of capital and profits. And just like any other business, profits is important for worker co-ops. Adding more to the priorities of worker cooperatives and the benefits that they have, it's leadership and entrepreneurial development. So the worker members that are part of the cooperative, they're also entrepreneurs. They also have that opportunity to grow and develop their skills. And it's important to also acknowledge that everyone has different skill sets, everyone has different experiences that they can contribute to the development of the business. As we talk about, implementing direct democracy or representative democracy in the workplace, there's some responsibilities that are best delegated to a few people. And it's not to say that there's no such thing as managers. You can still have managers in worker co-ops. And one of the strategies that a cooperative can implement, it's rotational management. So again, acknowledging that everyone has different needs, everyone has different skills and abilities, rotational management can be implemented to balance responsibilities, to share knowledge and increase job experience. So for instance, you can have a worker that has experience with marketing, or you can have someone that's an expert at operations or any other skill. Is just sharing. The point of rotational management is that you're sharing those skills so that, you know, if someone's on the management position, let's say for a year, uh, and then let's say after a year they rotate, the worker members rotate positions, they would have to live by those decisions made when they were managers. So that's one way to bridge the gap, to bridge that disconnect between management and the workers. Another aspect is it balances profits and efficiency. It ensures that every worker member is equipped and trained. One last priority, it's financial and employment stability. So again, with worker co-ops or any co-op in general, that they're open, they have open membership, they're voluntary enterprises. So worker members, they can contribute equitably to the development of the enterprise. So they can invest in the business and also get those benefits. And an important part, again, going back to the one member, one share, one vote, no single member benefits at the expense of others. So unlike conventional businesses or larger corporations, you can have one owner or a group of owners that can buy multiple shares, and it can override the votes of any other person. Whereas with worker co-ops, it restricts that, it limits that to one member. So moving on, so as we talk about worker co-ops as a business model, it's also a legal business entity. So the state of Illinois, you know, is you want to start a business. We all have heard of LLCs, standard corporations, limited partnerships. Here in the state of Illinois, in the year 2020, they passed the Limited Worker Cooperative Association Act, which legally recognizes worker cooperatives as a business entity. So entrepreneurs or business owners, they can operate a worker co-op as an LLC, but they can also transition into a LWCA, a Limited Worker Cooperative Association. It has the same benefits as a standard LLC, but it's here are the benefits that they have. So, for example, worker members, they have to own at least 51% of the business. The second one, it's investors do not have voting power in the business unless the workers decide otherwise. So again, talking about autonomy and independence, it's minimizing, excluding outside influences, outside factors that influence the decisions of the business. And again, talking about cooperation and community, it's also inviting producer and consumer cooperatives to participate in the business. Okay. And another benefit for worker co-ops, and again, connecting it to the cooperative principles of open membership, is that with worker co-ops, LWCAs, that workers don't necessarily need work authorization. So there's a lot of communities that struggle with employment. Let's talk about the immigrant community or people who have been involved in the justice system. Those communities have been neglected, and an alternative is being part of a worker co-op. As we talk about solidarity and social justice, worker co-ops are not only a business enterprise, but also a social enterprise. And another benefit is the act classifies all members as owners, is that you're giving ownership to the people that work there. And there's a lot of financial and tax benefits as well. So, talking about the legality, is it possible for a conventional business to transition to a worker co-op? And the answer is yes. There's different ways in which a business can transition into a worker co-op. And yeah, it's simply just changing the legal structure of it. Again, you can operate an LLC as a worker co-op internally, or you can simply change the business entity to LWCA here in the state of Illinois. Of course, it's just changing ownership, changing the profit structure, and changing governance and management. In other parts of the world, they've experimented with different legislation. And the two examples I give here, it's right to first refusal. So in business law, typically when a business owner wants to sell a business, or for many reasons, either be that the owner wants to retire, or let's say a larger business wants to buy out the smaller business, or the business wants to move overseas. There's different instances. um the point of right to first refusal in terms for worker co-ops is that before there's any type of negotiation, workers are the first party to prioritize, to make the first offer in buying or selling the business. Another example is a worker buyout law that has been implemented in Italy, and it's called the Marcora law. So this law, it's worked very well in different sectors of the economy in Italy, particularly in agriculture. And essentially what it is that, for instance, let's say there's a company or a business that went bankrupt, a bunch of workers get laid off. Those unemployed workers, instead of going to the government for unemployment benefits, they can go to the government, get together, or the workers have, I think the minimum is 9 workers. They can get together, get the lump sum of money from unemployment, and buy out the business and convert it into a worker cooperative. So it is sustainable. There's many instances, again, with worker co-ops that have worked in other parts of the world, and it's been beneficial for the workers. So as we talk about different ways of organizing the workplace, finding other ways to create opportunity. Here are some questions to consider when you want to start a worker cooperative. So you want to consider governance. How will the cooperative be governed? As we talked about, is it going to operate with direct democracy? Is it okay to see all the worker members as equal? Or do you want to operate with representative democracy? Of course, depending on the business needs, how the way the business is structured, there's going to be some responsibilities that are best delegated to somebody with a bit more experience. But it's also asking yourself, is it okay to share that knowledge with the worker members so that everyone can be on the same page, to contribute equitably to the development of the business? In regards to decision making, yes, how decisions will be made. Will it be based on one member, one vote? Is it all the workers sitting together collectively? In regards to revenues, excess revenue and profits, it's, how will excess profits be distributed? Will every worker member be paid the same? Those are conversations to have. Those are conversations that are typically not have in regular businesses, but with worker co-ops, it's essential so that all the workers get the same benefits. And also membership and ownership, right? A lot of questions in regards to ownership, like is a worker member gonna obtain ownership right away, or is the business gonna implement a type of probationary period to establish trust, to establish those skills to the worker owner? And also, how will members be admitted? So these are the few questions that to consider to have when you want to start a worker cooperative. So in a larger social context, as we talk about the city of Chicago, so worker co-ops are a growing business model, right? So as it connects to the way that the city of Chicago is investing in our communities, the city of Chicago has invested in what's called the Community Wealth Building Initiative. So it's finding alternative economic models to address economic inequality, gentrification, displacement, things of that way. How many communities here in the city, like for example, the South Side, the West Side, and many parts of the city, they've been neglected, and there hasn't been that many opportunities. So community wealth building, it's one of the few ways in which just empowering our communities, implementing democratic, sustainable, and community-driven vehicles, right? And worker co-ops are part of that ecosystem. So another, in regards to housing, we have housing cooperatives. We have community land trust to combat the negative effects of displacement and gentrification, keeping families in their communities. And also community investment vehicles, right? Is just keeping that money in the communities, maintaining that local wealth, and ensuring that everyone gets the resources. So yes, this is how worker co-ops connect to a larger context. But yes, this has been the presentation. I'm open for a Q&A. If you have any questions, we can open it up.
Great, thanks for a great presentation. If anyone has any questions, if they could please put them in the chat. We do have two questions. So undocumented immigrants can be a part of a worker co-op.
Yes. So the good thing about the legal entity of worker cooperatives, LWCAs, is that they don't necessarily need work documentation. So because they're considered owners, not workers.
Okay, great. Next question. What are the advantages, disadvantages to this versus starting a union?
Oh, so yes, with worker cooperatives as compared to unions. So with unions, right, they're already established, they're already part of the workplace. But the thing with unions is that it's a constant negotiation with the employer. With worker co-ops, it's starting everything from scratch, right? And just like with any other business, any startup enterprise, right? A lot of the issues that worker co-ops have starting up, it's financing. So they can go to a bank that is not really familiar with the business model, and corporate banks, they're skeptical with this type of model, which is why I bring the point of connecting with things, institutions like credit unions. Credit unions are a good way to connect. Just because credit unions and worker co-ops align, that's a good alternative to have. But again, yeah, with financing, that's also one of the main issues with worker co-op startups.
Great, thank you. Another question. Where can I find governance models for worker cooperative law firms or advertising agencies?
So in terms of governance and structuring bylaws, so you can connect with the Democracy at Work Institute. They have a lot of educational resources when it comes to worker co-ops and just developing worker co-ops. A lot of resources, a lot of readings that you can connect to.
Great, thank you. Another question. Are there resources for co-ops to connect with one another in the USA? For example, you mentioned Spain as a network for co-ops.
Oh yes, that's why I brought up the community wealth building initiative. So that is an initiative started by the city of Chicago. If you're interested, we can definitely connect, and it's pretty much a networking opportunity with different community models, not just worker co-ops, but also housing cooperatives, people within community land trusts. So it's a large network that's also local.
Great, thank you. We'll give everyone another minute for any other questions. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on youtube.com/Chicago BACP. Just a lot of thank yous, good information. There is a question. I'm wondering if it's risky to allow for end consumers to be a part of the ownership model. Is there a risk they make self-serving decisions?
So there are examples of having an internally democratic worker cooperative combined with consumer cooperatives. There are examples. One example that I can think of, it's a grocery store called the Mandela grocery store. I think it's out in California. where it's implementing both models and is giving benefits to both the worker members and the consumer members. So it is possible.
Great, thank you. What is the biggest benefit of LLC versus LWCCA?
So this is just an opinion. I'm not really a legal expert in this area, but with the research that I've done, so it's both ways. There's a different tax considerations, but LWCAs they're still a type of LLC. However, instead of having just one registered agent or just one owner, you're also adding other people, with the worker members.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
We have 1 more minute for any other questions that might come in. Is there grant funding for co-op businesses?
Yes, so in for funding, yeah, again, there's the Chicago Community Trust, I believe the name of the agency is called, but there's also larger networks in the nation that also provide startup capital for cooperatives. I just forget the name, but I mean, I can send that info in a follow-up. But yeah, it's a growing network, and there's also a lot of potential as well for resources.
Great. How does one consider different levels of input, financial or non-financial?
That it's addressing that in regards to the profits and financing. So it's important, just with any other business, it's important to have a business lawyer or an accountant. That would be my answer to that.
Great. I think that is all the questions that we have. Thanks for presenting. Thank yous are coming in. Excellent info. So I would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. I want to thank our presenters and hoping everyone has a safe and I guess warm weekend. It's gotten a little chilly out, so hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.